Hello there, Scott Spann here again on my sailboat office in Sausalito. This is the second in a series of videos giving you a quick overview of how we've been able to solve complex multi-stakeholder problems in a whole host of environments. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that right now. If you care to know more about that and the whole system, go look at the prior video. This video is a specific promise to people to get them through how do you do the kinds of small maps that I do as I lead into the bigger map. And I promised to deliver this in about 10 minutes. Now, some people said that I'm talking too fast when I do my videos. So I'm trying to solve for that. Some people have said that I take too long to do my videos, which is part of why I talk a little fast. So let me know in your feedback whether this is too fast, too long, whatever, and I'll see if I can adjust going forward. But right now, I want to keep the promise I made to those folks that ask for both how-tos and lessons from the field. When I asked, do you want lessons from the field or do you want how-to videos, the overwhelming majority of people that replied to the survey said we want both. So I'm going to try to wrap them both into one video here. So here we go. Now, I want to show you where we are in the structure. If you refer to that prior video, this is the structure of emergent impact. We're trying to create relationship and clarity at 6 organic levels. I won't read you through them to evoke these particular qualities. And what I want you to know is that where we are in this grid right now is we're on those top 2 levels, self and another, with individual interviews and an individual goal and systems map. So that's what we're working on right now. I am going to say briefly for those that didn't see the prior video that we're struggling. And all I'll say about that is the prior video tells you more about that. But this framework has been proven over the last 18 years to eliminate that struggle. And almost all of my clients experience a 3-fold increase in their ability to perform once they get through the process. So that's a pretty significant jump, and that's pretty good testimony to getting us out of struggling. I'll just share with you that we're struggling because we're struggling with reality, and that's what the fundamental struggle is. And the 2 forms of struggle that takes is struggling with what it means to be human, working against it rather than with it, coupled with struggling what it means to be in a complex systems. And again, working against the way systems work rather than with the way systems work. So now we're going to jump into mapping. I could easily take 2 days on how to map. In fact, I have in prior classes that I've taught. I could take 20 minutes and do a better job. For those of you that want a 20-minute video, let me know about that. But right now, I'm going to do a 10-minute video. And if you want the longer video, email me. If you want the printout of this, the notes I'm using to deliver this, send me an email about that, and I'll be sure to get that to you too. So, by the way, in simple situations, you may not need a map. But beyond that, you'll likely find that mapping saves significant time, money, and stress if it's a complex problem, like it's hard to get your head around. If you need a shared view, you're working with lots of people, and you've all got to be able to see the same thing, literally get on the same page. If you need to identify leverage inside the system, that is, you don't have a lot of resource, a lot of time, and you need to be able to pick the handful of things to work on to really move the system forward, biggest bang for your buck, so to speak. And if you have too many options, if there are just too many different people vying for too many different things to go do, this is a great way to really identify, well, where are the few places, or where should we start with all those options we've got to choose from. And even if you don't intend to map, don't want to map, understanding mapping, how it's done, is the basis for being able to think systemically. So I would encourage you to spend your 10 minutes here anyway. So when you need to map, here's some basics. I'm going to name them now, and then I'll drop into them just a tiny bit. So your mindset is critical to this. Designing the goal of the system comes next once your mindset is clear. Then right under the goal are typically 5 to 7 key drivers. They're formally called resources. And then once you've got those 5 to 7, then the remaining bits of the conversation you're having, or the interview you conducted, or the team meeting you're holding, those remaining bits fit under those 5 to 7 in a way that supports those 5 to 7 to drive that goal. And then you got to tie the whole thing together. You got to put in the feedback loops or the connections across the system, what pushes on what in the system, the causality. And then you want to validate, test, and revise what typically you want to be their map. I mean, sometimes I use this to map myself. I've done it when I'm struggling with a particular business problem. But more often than not, I'm working with a team or a group of people or another leader, or I'm trying to get aligned with another leader where we've got a conflict and I really want to understand them first. So I call it their map because it needs to feel like their map. It needs to be their map when it's done. If they say, oh, Scott's map of me blank, then that's kind of the death knell. And then you got to be able to add value with it. So what do you do with it? How do you add value? So we're going to cover that. So your state of being. I'm just going to say these 3 quick things. One, you just know it can be done. A lot of people think this is impossible. In fact, there's a whole story about impossible on my on my blog site if you want to go look at that. A leader in HP that thought it was impossible to do this, but indeed we actually did it inside of a month, actually. So it can be done. There's a rigor to mapping. There's a method to it. There are steps to be taken that will ensure that you have a high quality map. And it can be mapped in a number of ways. It's not rocket science. And so knowing those 3 things give you a lot of freedom. They give freedom to the person persons you're working with when you're doing this, if you're not just doing a map for yourself. So just shift your state of being to know it can be done. There's a rigor to it, and you can do it in a number of ways. Then designing the goal of the system. I think it's the single most valuable contribution you can typically make is to help people get clear about the goal. And you typically do that once you've been through whatever the process is you've done to gather the information you're gathering, whether it's interviews, reviewing literature, or collecting feedback in a team meeting, or whatever that's like. But you want to be able to name the goal of the system. You want to be able to shift, in order to do that, your state of mind, even your state of being, to imagining that you're the leader, whatever that leader is, or that you're the system, or that you're the constituent that the system is designed for, or the customer the system is designed for. And just literally whatever you have to do to put yourself in that state of mind. If it's imagine you're sitting in the corner office, if it's imagining you're standing in front of 10,000 people, whatever that is, shift to that state. And then from that perspective, name the goal, whatever you think that goal is. And then you want to be able to quantify that. You want to make it positive, you want to make it measurable, and you want to make it time specific. And we won't get into the neurology of that right now because I'm trying to get this done really quickly for you, but it does shift the way the brain operates when you make it positive, measurable, and time specific. And there's a ton of data to support that we can get into in a deeper time. Some examples quickly. Some of these are measurable, time specific, some are not, depending on the client and how much time we have. But there was one around social equity with the Rosa Parks Elementary School in San Francisco, trying to get clear about a goal that would serve all of the different ethnicities in the system. And it's a system that's weighted to ensure equal access to the resources and opportunities needed to thrive. And so the measurable components of that happen to be the system that's weighted, and you can measure equal access, and you can measure thrive. They didn't want to have just survive in there. Everyone wanted to be able to thrive. And so that's what they came up with. It was a very unifying goal, and it served as the basis for the rest of the work we did with them. In climate change, become the leaders in reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2030. This was the goal for REAMP, the project I launched in 2004. It's been the most successful climate change project in the US to date. Clearly measurable, clearly time specific, really startled them, but it was simply the math of the system. It was what was needed. It wasn't, you don't want a goal that's a big, hairy, audacious goal, which some people have misinterpreted this to be. You don't want a goal that's achievable. Some of these goals that we've got to be able to hit, they don't seem to be achievable. They seem impossible, but it's what reality dictates. And then here was one from a global supply chain, scale to 30 million profitable on-time deliveries in 3 years with increasing quality sustainably. But the sustainably piece was about, don't get us there and then have so burned us out that we can't then do the very next thing we got to go do. So there are 3 examples for you. So once you've got a goal, once you got the mindset, once you've got a goal, now you're assembling the 5 to 7 key drivers. And there are typically only 5 to 7 key drivers. I've done hundreds and hundreds of maps, and I think maybe once or twice I went beyond 5 to 7. If we're thinking clearly, it's 5 to 7. And they're the ones that directly cause the goal that you're trying to achieve. They're known in macroeconomics as mutually exclusive and comprehensively exhaustive, which means they're distinct from one another. That's the mutually exclusive part. The comprehensively exhausted means if you had each one of those up and operating at a healthy level, you'd be able to achieve your goal. That is, that's the full set, 80, 20, 90, 10, something like that. And the acronym in the world, in the industry is MECE for that, if you ever hear that term. They are the math of the goal, that when you add each one of those up or multiply them or however the system works, they'll get you to the goal. And that's the test for that. And there's typically an order to that 5 to 7, so you want to lay them out in that order sequentially. Many of the arguments or the conflicts I found in working on systems is everybody has a piece of the answer. They just don't have it in the right answer. Somebody's trying to get to customer satisfaction before you've got employee satisfaction. And how can a dissatisfied employee satisfy a customer very well? If the employee is satisfied, it's much easier to satisfy the customer. So that's the 5 to 7 key drivers. And there's an example of some key drivers, some work I did with a good friend of mine, Jim Ritchie Dunham, at the town of Vail. Their overall goal was achieve and sustain Vail as the premier international resort and resort community, able to provide premier service at its current size sustainably over the next 5 to 10 years. So that breaks down into two components. The achieve and sustain as a premier international resort is, think about it, and this is the not rocket science part. It's pre-arrival, that is the plane reservations, the brochure I got in the mail, what I saw on the website, what I heard from my friends who'd gone to Vail. That's all the pre-arrival stuff. That's making the decision to get there. Then there's the arrival, when I popped over Vail Pass. Did it meet my expectations when I stepped into the hotel? Did it meet my expectations when I got on the slope? Did it meet my expectations? And actually, I just bridged into the here a little bit there. The here is when now I'm in it. I'm in the week at Vail. Am I having the experience I expected to have? Is it a good experience, or I'm having better than I thought I'd going to have? And then there's the departure. And the departure had to do with what was called no surprises. That is, not finding out at the last minute that my kids had charged a new set of skis to the room, and my bill suddenly blew up on me. On the Premier Mountain Community, it was personal, family, and community. And again, I'm saying this because that's not rocket science, but it is mutually exclusive for the most part, and it is comprehensively exhaustive. If you have those three things, you probably got a pretty good Premier Mountain Community. So there's an example of key drivers. Now I'm going to work on here off of a piece that Jim and I also worked in Guatemala some years ago with the Quiché and Hmong peoples and the former guerrilla leaders on one end of the spectrum, and on the other end of the spectrum we had to interview the people in the military and the intelligence services. And I'm sharing this one with you, though we didn't map it this formally with the time we did it. Working with that intelligence leader was a real challenge for me because I had judgments going into that, and I realized I had to set those aside to be in service to the system. And to the Quiché and Hmong peoples and the former guerrilla leaders, I had to really be deeply curious and even caring and compassionate about what the intelligence officer was trying to accomplish. So as I recall that interview, here's how I would map that today. That the quality and the goal for this interview for this leader would be the quality and quantity of timely, optimal, actionable leadership decisions for Guatemalan society as a whole. That was what he was really trying to ensure and trying to get the president to do that. And he was challenged in that. So then what are the 5 to 7 things that he has to have to be able to do that? Well, he had to have a certain quality and quantity of intelligence officers. He had to have a certain quality and quantity of a network of sources. And then he had to be able to combine those to create a quality and quantity of data gathering, indexing, and retrieval. So they had to have a database to be able to get at the information that they were able to glean. And then they have a certain quality and quantity of data analysis. And then all of that has to turn into intelligence storytelling. When they tell the stories to the cabinet or to the president or to whomever they've got to share the stories with, those are the 5, the MISI for that set. And if they had all those things, they would be able to do a darn good job as an intelligence officer to help ensure timely, optimal, actionable leadership decisions for Guatemalan society as a whole. All right, so now there were the remaining bits that came out of the interview. And by the way, this, assuming all this happens after the interview, but those remaining 20 to 30 elements, they drive those 5 to 7 key drivers, and they do it in a way similar to how you created those 5 to 7 key drivers in the first place. So you go to each one of those 5 to 7, and you think through, well, what are the 5 to 7 things that cause that? And you organize them in a similar way that you did the first 5 to 7, which is using that concept of MISI and math and all of that. So I would suggest that when you do this, when I do this, I fully complete the work on the first one. And then, and only then do I work on the second one and the third and the fourth and so on. Because if I get to jumping around, it gets pretty confusing. And if I get the first one right, it's really amazing how easy the second one becomes. And if I get those 2 right, the third one really comes. And by the time I get to the end, it's just flowing very, very smoothly. But if I jump around, I lose that. And then once all those things are put together, then I connect them directionally with positive or negative arrows. And when I say positive or negative, I mean a reinforcing arrow. When this thing goes up, this thing goes up. Or an inverse arrow. When this one goes up, this one goes down. And so you connect the whole thing directionally. So I'm not going to walk through each bit of this. You can pause the screen if you want to take a look at it, if you want to judge the MISI of it, if you want to think about the arrows and that sort of stuff, feel free to. But this is what that sort of a level looks like. And then you have to be able to tie the whole thing together, the connections across the system. And again, there I begin with the first key driver and then finally the overarching feedback loops. And again, I'm trying to be as clean and economical in this as I possibly can because this has got to be describable. You got to be able to tell a clean story with whoever you're presenting this to eventually. So this is what it looks like when it's completed. And so you'll notice that I've got those arching arrows that go across the whole system. And then I've got those big thick arrows, you know, starting at the end, the last one in the light green, which that's what directly causes that goal. Until the story is told, we're not ensuring timely, optimal, and so forth decisions. And once that happens, then that actually drives up the quality and quantity of the experience that these leaders now have, these intelligence officers now have. It actually gets higher. And then that primes the whole pump again. All right, so that's building the map. And then when you're testing and modifying their map, you're first testing the goal, and then the key drivers, and then you're going domain by domain, and then you're tying in the feedback loops. And then the last question I typically ask is, if you had all of these elements in place, what's your level of confidence that you'd be able to accomplish your goal if they were all operating in a healthy way? And I don't stop on the map until I get to an 8, 9, or 10. And typically, we're 95% of the way there if we've done a good job on the mapping, 95% of the way there. So we're already at a 9. But I want to make sure we've really nailed it so that they feel seen, heard, understood, appreciated, and valued. So that's their map. Now then comes the part about adding value. So a solid map at least gives you the MISI, the math. And oftentimes when I've worked with CEOs, they haven't really thought through all the pieces. They'll have like 4 pieces, and then they'll have this goal, and then I'll go, yeah, but you know, a lot of other CEOs or a lot of other leaders or EDs or teams or organizations, they have these 4, but they don't get to that level of performance that you're talking about. What is the other thing that you must have or you must do or you must need to get you to that level of performance? And from that view, that place, there's a technical term for it called scaffolding in linguistics, and we can talk about that some other time. But from that point of view, they're able to nail what is that missing piece. The other thing that really often helps leaders is the sequencing. Many times they're not clear on the sequence. They're talking about different pieces, but they don't have that. I mean, they know it if you take the time to elicit it, but typically no one's ever elicited it in a rigorous way. So even the sequencing can help in realizing, oh, I do have to satisfy my employees before they're going to be able to satisfy customers or whatever that situation is. Level of readiness is another way of looking at it. You can simply take that level of 5 at the top or 7 at the top and say, scale of 1 to 10, how ready are these relative to your goal? And you know, okay, this is an 8, this is a 9, this is an 8, this is a 3. Uh-oh. Within that part of 3, then where is the weakness in that? And you can drop down and actually start to figure out, oh, this is where I go to get leverage because everything else is in pretty good shape, but this is the weak area. Let's find out how to boost that. And then leverage. Sometimes you'll see on the map, without having done all that formal analysis that I talked about in the first video, sometimes you'll see really quickly where's the highest leverage or what drives everything else in the system. So if we go back and look at that map of the intelligence officer, way back to the quality of the values of the intelligence officers, notice how much that drives in that dark green section on the far left. And then notice how much that dark green section on the far left drives everything else in the system. So so focusing on the quality of the personnel we bring into the intelligence services, if you're charged with that, is probably the single most important thing you can do. And if you do that well, you can rest assured that much of the rest of the system will function well. Let's say it another way, because you got to have all those other bits and pieces and stuff in there. If you get that wrong, you're going to have a heck of a time correcting the rest of the system and getting the rest of the system to work properly. The reason I put this mapping piece first, and there's a whole section I can do on interviewing and how you interview, and there's a subtlety to it that, that deserves, and in that 2-day training, it probably took up a fourth to a third of the training. Interviewing is really the essence of being able to elicit a good map, but knowing how you're going to map is the essence of being able to interview well. If you don't know what you're going to have to come away with, you'll end up leaving the interview with missing pieces. And so that's why I did this mapping piece first. But once you've practiced this a few times and you know how to map, like pick a newspaper article or something like that, you should be in good shape around being able to do the kind of interview you need to get the information and the relationships you need to be able to do a good map. And by the way, I do want you to know that the first time I did one of these for an executive, it was so valuable that I was paid $10,000 just to do that one map. of an executive. So there's high value here. It's the size of the map. There's a disproportional relationship between the size of the map and the value, or maybe there's a proportional relationship. If you can make a really small, tight map that solves a really big problem, that's very high value. At any rate, there was a lot of value in that. Another one I did for a leader of a national organization working with the Obama administration. That individual map I did of her was so valuable to her that she ended up hiring me to do a year's worth of work with her organization, valued at about $125,000. So don't underestimate the power of this individual mapping thing. It can be incredibly, incredibly potent. Next, we're going to go to looking at how do you get a team aligned, because even though you've got a good map, you might not have the team aligned about that good map. And so we're going to talk about another way to get teams aligned. I'll do that next. And here are my coordinates. If you're listening to this anywhere other than scottspann.com, please go on over there. Leave me a comment. Give me a like. If you didn't like it, let me know you didn't like it, but let me know why. Let me know what kind of a complex issue you're working on. And if there's a way I can help you with that, I could possibly do a blog on that for you. See what people want. And if you would, please subscribe. I'd love to keep delivering value to you. If you found this valuable, then subscribe, knowing that I won't abuse your trust about that. And that's it for now. So wherever you are, I certainly hope this finds you thriving today. Take good care. Bye-bye.